I'm only sweating a little bit. Check. It's all working. Jamie, can you really hear?
to our email.
You ready? All right, I will bring the March 21st, 2023 Board of Education meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Kate Thomas,
Here.
Troy Carr.
Here.
Deb Baker.
Here.
Jim Hansen is absent with notice and may join via Zoom later. Clay Colomb is absent with notice. Jamie Clapham,
Here.
Michael Berkland.
Here.
Just a quick reminder to make sure everybody's got their speakers muted on their computers. All right, we have Pastor Randy Phillips tonight for the invocation, please.
What a joy it is, a privilege even, to participate in progress in our community, progress in our schools, progress in our families. And I would hope you would agree once again that we are blessed. And we pray tonight, and I want to pray blessing upon the activity of this board and of this district. So join with me as we pray. Father, thank you once again tonight. As we count our blessings, we can name them one by one, multiple upon multiple, hundreds if not thousands of blessings just today, Lord God. And we are grateful. We know, Lord God, that we are nothing without you. And we desire, Lord God, to be about the Father's business. Thank you for this board. Thank you for these leaders. Thank you for these parents and students and teachers and staff and faculty that are represented Rapid City School District, Lord God. Pray blessing on everything that is done, Lord God. And tonight, especially for decisions that are made, for things that are going to be decided, for things that are going to be presented, for thoughts and ideas and plans, we need wisdom and discernment. I pray you'd give that to this staff and to this board, Lord God, that they would do things not of their own gain or their own accord, but by inspiration, with wisdom and discernment, to the glory of God. And we give you the praise and thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice.
All right, I need a motion to approve the proposed agenda. Deb?
Sorry.
Michael?
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Hi.
All those opposed? All right, on to sharing the success, Ms. Swaggart.
Thank you, President Thomas. Tonight, we are sharing the success of the Stevens High School Science Bowl team. Would you like to all step forward? You can stand up here. We even have one of our own, President Thomas, Megan, that's joining us. The Stevens High School Science Bowl team took first place at the South Dakota Regional, qualifying them for a trip to the national competition in Washington, D.C., April 27th. Qualifying for nationals is a great accomplishment for this team. There has not been an in-person competition since 2020, a month before COVID hit. So this was really the first time these students have had the opportunity to compete together, and they made the most out of that opportunity. Looking forward to DC, the team is not only excited to compete on the national level, but also to experience the history and the museums DC has to offer. They love to learn. The team members include senior Youngjin Yang, Megan Ju, Evelyn Har, junior Samuel Barnes, and freshman Nicholas O'Connor, and team coach Robert Julius. So I expect that we'll have them back after April 27th and hear even more great things about them, but I want to congratulate them on this success and thank them for representing Stevens High School and Rapid City area schools so well. President Thomas, that is the success we had tonight. So I will look forward to the next meeting.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right, we are on to persons wishing to address the school board. I might have a little reminder here. Issues that affect an individual or particular school should be first addressed at the building level so that staff has the opportunity to address the issues that affect them directly. Speakers should focus their main points and not be repetitive. Personal matters or complaints that directly or indirectly identify an employee shall not be discussed. Such complaints shall be filed in accordance with our district code. To maintain a civil dialogue, threats and intimidation are not allowed. And our first speaker is Jordan Mason.
Thank you, Madam President and honorable members of this board. I am here today. Obviously, we live in interesting times where I see our city is trying to adopt education policy. And yet I am here because our education arm of our local government is trying to adopt religious policy. And I'm here to specifically address your invocation policy. Now, before I begin, I want to say that I've heard more logical fallacies, which I hope you teach in our schools, at local governmental bodies from our state to our county to our school board than I do anywhere else. And I'm sure, and I will get into that in just a quick second, but your invocation policy is disturbing to say the least. And I want to read this to you. It says that an invocation is to support, wish guidance upon, and encourage the Rapid City School Board District. I hate to break this to you. You are not demigods. You do not always deserve praise. You do not always deserve blessings. And then like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I will not bow a knee to you at all times. It is inappropriate and it goes against my beliefs. In addition, I would point out that constitutionally, you are flying in the face of regulating content. You do not have the right in the United States of America, which I proudly fought for, to dictate what I say and I do not say. You do not have that right. You do have the right to dictate the time, place, and manner. And to say that this is an either or, the logical fallacy, which it is, which is a false dichotomy. It is also a slippery slope logical fallacy for those young students who may want to get into debate at a later time, which I was probably a member of. It's a slippery slope to say that if we don't do it this way, we can have nothing at all. In the words of former President George W. Bush, right? You're either with us or you're against us. It's either black or it's white. That's completely excluding the possibility of gray or a third option, and it's logically flawed. You can allow prayer, you can allow free speech in this great nation, the United States, and you can allow that and the ability of our pastors and our clergy to speak and invoke, right? Invoke a deity, which is what the term means. It does not mean to give a blessing. It does not mean to only give praise. It means to invoke the power of a supernatural being and or a deity. That is what you are doing. That is what the term means and it's defined as. So I'm here today to encourage the school boards to revisit your flagrantly unconstitutional invocation policy. Look at some of the Supreme Court cases that speak on this. I have sent a list of them to a number of you and would encourage you to allow people to speak freely and pray freely as our Constitution intended. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Carolyn Hofer.
Good evening, board. I've researched the books in this district for over a year, and there are hundreds of pornographic books in the school libraries. It's alarming when you read how violent and graphic that they are, and the topics range from pure sex all the way to child rape. Staff members are bringing in and defending books showing pornographic images and content to minors, and they justify its existence in the schools by claiming that it's freedom of speech and calling them challenging topics. It's not. Porn is accessible everywhere and it's being normalized, but this doesn't justify the schools to welcome it. Exposing minors to sexually explicit content gets them numb to it, so they won't resist or question it when they see it. Now, regardless if staff are well-meaning or not, pornography is addictive and encourages risky behaviors which can be detrimental to a person's safety and well-being. The school standard should be providing age-appropriate books that inspire kids to cultivate good moral character. On page 20 of the discipline matrix, There is a pornography policy that students have to follow, but it's a bit hypocritical to have a porn policy aimed only at students, but yet staff can bring it in all under the guise of education. And this is why we need a no pornography policy that would adhere to everyone and reassure parents that their children cannot access sexual content in the schools that they attend. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Heather Baxter.
Good evening, board. I'm Heather. I wanted to address some of the handbook portions that is printed out that says you'll not use the internet to engage in any illegal acts. This includes, or it says you'll not use post obscene, profane, lewd, vulgar, or disrespectful language in public messages, private messages, or material posted on web pages. The handbook also says failure to comply with any of the above terms and conditions shall result in disciplinary action and may become subject to legal action, either civil or criminal. It goes on to talk about dress and grooming, wearing clothing that includes words or pictures with obscene, vulgar, abusive, discriminatory, or anything that promotes or advertises alcohol, chemicals, tobacco, is illegal for anything that's illegal for use by minors. Wearing clothing and other items or grooming in a manner that represents or promotes hate, and wearing clothing or grooming in a manner that is sexually explicit or disruptive. The purpose of the policy goes on to state that to educate the district on discrimination and harassment and to prevent, correct, and address behavior that violates this policy. The RCAS district prohibits discrimination against harassment of any student, employee, community member, or group of individuals defined by this policy. And it goes on to describe discrimination against color, race, religion. So I had sent an email on March 2nd to the entire board, including the interim CEO and acting interim, in regards to just a few of the books in the local schools regarding racism. A few titles of books promoting racism that I shared with them were titled Me and White Supremacy, Multiplication is for White People, How to Be Less Stupid About Race, and of course, a book called Push. Just a couple of the remarkable amount of RCS books readily available for minors to check out. The books are monumentally filled with graphic sexual scenes, expressive rape scenes involving race, repeated rape with fathers and their daughters. For example, one of the books I looked at has nigger in it 22 times and is extremely derogatory about it. I have an African-American relative in my family, actually more than one, and I find that very offensive. There's sentences such as, Daddy put his pee-pee smelling thing in my mouth, my pussy, but never holds me. I see me, first grade, pink dress, dirty sperm, stuff is on it, no comb in my hair. This is a book with colored people, and sadly, that's just the G version that I read you. I find it interesting that the schools promote and readily have these books available for anyone in the high school to read. I've been told by kids they walk into the library and they're readily sitting there on the front shelf. There are these books also at elementary and middle schools. Definitely appalling. I keep my kids as priority, and that's why I pursue things of moral character and integrity for them. In previous meetings, a board member had brought up multifarious local community racist infractions in our schools. The books in our schools seem to suggest to a reader that racism is good and deliberately antagonizes it. Why have books that purposely provoke tensions? In separate antecedent meeting, a giggling board member made a remark that kids see it on their phones anyway, while referring to the pornographic material in the school libraries. I beg to differ. I block that disgusting filth from my kids' phones. I'm a taxpayer, and I'm not okay with schools having policies that say lascivious words, pictures are not allowed on clothing, and they can't be verbalized or viewed on school computers, yet it's okay for the library to have it for them to check out. We need consistency with change in handbook policies. Raging racism, discrimination, pornography, books with incest, molestation, nudity pictures, That's stuff that can be at the public library, doesn't need to be in our public schools. If a student was to talk to a teacher this way, it would be sexual harassment. The handbook states there's no tolerance for that. If a teacher talked this way to a student, it'd be child abuse, sexual assault, and grooming. I would like to see a policy created that takes porn and racist material out of the public school and let the public libraries have it, like I had mentioned already. My kids go to school for an education in the basics of math, English, science, not to read licentious material that diagrammatically tells how a father rapes his daughter, every detail,
Mrs.
page after
Baxter,
page.
That's time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, Sarah Gross.
Hi, board. My name is Sarah Gross, and I am a parent and a teacher in our school district. I have been attending and watching the Board of Education meetings regularly for the last year and a half. And I'm not a social studies teacher. And since August, I've been asking you to talk to social studies teachers about the social studies standards. And I'm so grateful that you did and that you got a firm understanding of the teacher and the school perspective. And so tonight I'm back, and I'm back because of item 10A through G. And these are the library policies. And so I've looked through them. And I'm curious about a couple of things. I'm curious if anyone can request materials to be reconsidered. I think it says RCAS community member. I'm also curious about how many books one can request to be reviewed at a time. Can we pull 25 books off the shelf and all of them need to be reviewed? Or is it one at a time? And so those are a couple of my questions, along with how long before the book can be questioned again. Let's say it survives the challenge. Well, when can it be challenged again? Next month? I'm worried about the time. I'm not worried about reviewing books. I love to read books. And so that's not a question at all. It's just, I'm wondering about the practicalities of some of the policies. And so I think I was taken aback. I paused for a second because the things that were read at this board meeting, I feel a bit off with our high school kids here. And so as we consider and as we make these policies, I hope that you'll include the librarians as well as concerned community members, because I think working together is, of course, the goal. Because if you wanted me to pull off racist books, I don't know where, I don't know what I'd pull and who would be upset if I pulled this one and who would be upset if I pulled a different one. And so I think it puts librarians especially in a really challenging position, because everyone is here for the common educational goal. But as we've learned over the last year, banning books is a really challenging issue, and it's not new. It's been going along for a really long time. And so I'm going to dig in and see what information I can find about how I can support policy and how I can implement policy properly in my classroom. Thank you again for your time and your effort, and I'll be enjoying listening to your conversations with the policy, it's finance committee. That's at the end of the meeting. And hopefully you can talk and pull that off and talk more about that 10A through G.
Next speaker, David Neeham. 5.
Whoa, sweet. All right. Thank you for everybody for listening. Appreciate this opportunity to speak to the board and the community. Joe Biden likes to say that we are in a battle for the soul of a nation, a battle in which he considers himself and his political party to be the good guys. Now, if Biden is correct, then the good guys are for media and social media censorship and propaganda. The good guys are for using the FBI to intimidate parents and grandparents. And they are also for weaponizing the Justice Department to attack their political opponents. The good guys stoke racism for votes by labeling their opponents as racist and cause division with critical theory. The good guys are also for sexualizing and gender confusing children of all ages. Now, what does all this have to do with public education? Well, these good guys use teachers' unions to indoctrinate students. Despite parental objections and the passage of laws to protect children, teachers in multiple states have been videotaped saying that the indoctrination will continue. It will just have to be more deceptive. And I'm not talking about teachers. I'm talking about teachers' unions very clearly. I really support teachers. If we hope to salvage public schools, I have 3 suggestions. First, since bad ideas have killed more people than bullets, we should assess the need for audio-visual equipment in all classrooms. Second, students should be required to take a class on the history of authoritarian governments that use public education to indoctrinate children, focusing on those governments responsible for killing millions of their own citizens. Students have a right to know that some teachers' unions are eagerly pushing the agenda of one political party. Teachers' unions' eagerness to indoctrinate students should no longer be a secret. Third, school vouchers are crucial when some teachers and their unions have lost sight of their true mission. Many states have recently enacted school choice opportunities. If you web search the long march through the institutions, you will find that the phrase is used to describe the intellectual takeover of a society without the need to resort to military conflict. Instead, the strategy focuses on slowly winning over the institutions that determine the direction of a culture and creating a soft revolution. The long march starts with the universities, the unions, the arts, K-12 schools, the media, then corporations, and finally, society as a whole. Well, we are almost there. But fortunately, Americans are awakening to the truth. A recent poll showed that less than 21% of Americans now trust the journalists of the corporate media that have failed our nation. And the self-professed good guys are being exposed as pathological liars by real journalists. You know, I believe that America will be saved, but maintaining liberty requires courage, sacrifice, and diligence. I encourage everyone to do their part to save our nation, because history declares that the far left socialists, Marxists, and communists that indoctrinate children have never been the good guys. Polling shows that the division in our nation is at its highest level since the Civil War. 34% of Americans approve of a national divorce. If teachers' unions started focusing on advocating for their members instead of indoctrinating children, that would go a long way towards healing our national divide. Thank you.
Thank you. And last speaker, Florence Thompson.
I'm going to try to stop the echo a little bit. My name is Florence Thompson. I'm president of South Dakota Parents Involved in Education. We are a chapter of US PI, US Parents Involved in Education. We've been working for parental control and local control of schools since 2014. And I've been involved in the fight against Common Core and all of this stuff in our legislature since, I don't know, probably 13 years ago. So it's been a long time, but I do think things are coming to a head. This year in the legislature, we had SB 192, and this was a Senate bill, an act to provide liability for publishing or distributing a material harmful to minors on the internet and the wrongful retention of individually identifiable information. And we also had SB 193, an act to establish provisions related to the review and selection of instructional materials in school districts. Now neither one of these bills passed, but they will be back. And I think that the handwriting on the wall is that schools would be wise to look at their policies that they have on materials, to study the materials they have carefully, and with their conscience, make a judgment as to whether your policy is actually preventing harm to students through pornography and critical race theory. One of the things they emphasized in the discussion of this bill was that schools need to have a policy that's proactive, not reactive. In other words, the parent shouldn't have to, or the citizen or the whoever shouldn't have to find a book, prove that it's obscene, jump through a bunch of hoops, and then have a bunch of hearings we pass from one person to another to get that book out of there. Though that book shouldn't have been there. And the school has a responsibility ahead downstream to prevent what's going in to the schools. You need to know that the schools are under attack. You're under assault by these pornographers, basically. And we need to get ahead of them. We need to look at what's coming in, both through the libraries and through the classrooms and through grants. Because a teacher can write a grant for materials and those can come into the classroom and you might not even know what's coming in. And I would dare to say, I don't think most of you know what's coming in. It's too hard to keep up with all of it. There's no way you can. So you've got to have a proactive way of screening these materials before they come in, before they're purchased. So please look at this. And it needs to have parent input. It needs to have citizen input. And it needs to have some common sense. You know, anyone looking at these materials, how can you justify that content for children? It's hard to justify it for adults, but that's a personal choice. But it should not be promoted in the schools. So anyway, what is happening, and I don't think you realize this, and I don't think any board realizes this, the unions that represent you down there in Pierre at the state legislature, they are all pro for these policies. We want all these books in the libraries. They want to keep the schools safe for porn. And they come into every single meeting, and it's the school boards association whom you pay for. It's the administrators association. It's the RCEA, the teachers union. It's the counselors. It's the big schools. I suppose you guys pay to be into that, the big schools union. And by the way, they don't like to be called unions. Rob Monson and Wade Pogany confronted me down in Pierre and said, how can you call us a union? We're not a union. I said, that's too bad. I looked up union in the dictionary and yeah, they're a union. They're not a labor union. They're not a registered labor union, but they are a union. They're joining together for a political purpose. And I don't think the boards really know what these people are doing in Pierre.
That's time, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we are on to board response to open topics. I'll take hands at this point in time. Mr. Berkland.
I know we're going to talk about these policies, so I'll save a lot of it. But the first distinction that I just want to draw is, once again, the difference between graphic and pornographic. And we need to have discussions about where that line is. The other thing that I wanted to address was our policy does currently say we need to look at the work as a whole. And that's part of why we don't have these blanket bans that just say nothing with the F word, because there are a lot of great books out there that do have the N word in them, that do have swear words in them. If a history book says that Thomas Jefferson raped his slaves, that is a statement. Do we ban that history book? So that's why we don't have just kind of these blanket bans. And the other thing I wanted to just remind parents and community members is, per our current policy, you can ask for your student to not have access to any book at any time. And if a librarian or a teacher doesn't work with you on that, then that is something that I do believe that we need to look at.
Mrs. Clapham.
Just a couple clarifications, and like Mr. Berkland said, we're gonna get into the policies as it is. I mean, as it says in the agenda, just a couple things. One, The question about how many books and the timing, that's a question I had myself, as I looked at the policies, and some things I've read in other districts. So those concerns, kind of already in my mind. As far as discussion about audiovisual and classrooms, our students all have rights to privacy. And so there's not going to be audiovisual equipment in classrooms that are violating the rights of other students. We're not going to violate any student's privacy, and that's the law. So that's not really an issue that's going to be addressed. Also, as far as grants, and I know people who are here know that grants are read through the board, so there can't be grants applied for that we don't know about. Those have to come through the district. So to imply that there are grants that teachers are applying for, or buying things, or representing the district, that's an errant claim. That doesn't actually happen, because all of those grants have to come through us and are voted for by the district and have to be read and approved. So just clarifying some of the things that maybe could be misinterpreted or misunderstood.
All right, any other board responses? None at this time. All right, so we are on to student board reports. Kevin Biggrove from Rapid City High School.
Hello, board, and hello, everyone who's attending. It's nice to see everyone here back on this sunny day. To start us off, Rapid City High School is excited to report that we had a very successful biannual blood drive on March 10th. Thanks to the amazing effort of our student leader, Kaylee Wood, we collected 34 units and our goal was only 25. Continuing on, we are nearing the end of our third term already. This Friday, March 24th is the last day of the quarter and the end of our 4 classes. This week's classes will be finishing final projects and taking exams. Then on March 27th, we will start our new courses for 4th quarter. And at the end of each quarter, Rapid City High School holds an all-school assembly. On March 24th, we'll have an assembly scheduled to allow for all learners and staff to gather in historic theater. During the assembly, we will celebrate learners that have exhibited the school-wide expectations of being respectful, present, and courageous. Also at the assembly, the Rushmore Rotary Club will present the winners of the 4-way test essay contest. Last but not least, Rapid City High School proudly hosts the Rapid City Area Schools Virtual High School. Each quarter, we are excited to welcome new learners to this program. This quarter, we are welcoming over 15 new learners at the Virtual High School program. In conclusion, I would like to remind you of our school-wide expectations at Rapid City High School. Be respectful, present, and courageous. Respectfully submitted, Kevin Bickrell.
Thank you. As you said, it was a sunny day. I'm looking out and it's 6 o'clock and I'm just so glad to see the sun still. All right, Megan Jew from Stevens High School, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I'm Megan Jew. Yeah, I haven't been here the past couple weeks, so I'll be updating you on a couple of things. In February, the Stevens Student Council put on Mr. SHS, which is essentially a beauty pageant with 9 senior boys that they host each year as a fundraiser. This year, we fundraised for the Children's Miracle Network, and not only was Johnny Hill crowned as this year's Mr. SHS, the Student Council also raised over $3,000 for the Children's Miracle Network. The Stevens girl basketball team competed at state in Sioux Falls and placed 7th, and Stevens is also having their first ever school sanctioned softball team competing this spring, so make sure to go support the girls at their games. Last week, all students and staff received a survey asking their preference for which one of 2 new Raider mascots they preferred. After voting, we now have a new mascot which will start showing up on our gear next year. At the state visual arts competition this weekend, many Stevens students brought their art pieces to show off. Addie Algier received the Director's Choice Award and 2nd place drawing. Petra Mandy received 3rd place for her painting, and Hannah Gelson received 1st place in crafts. And then today is World Down Syndrome Day, so students at our school wore crazy socks to school, and Student Council helped collect donations for socks.
Thank you. On to
Can we
number.
ask a question?
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
Tell me about the mascot. Did you change the mascot or is it just different?
Yeah, so the mascot originally was like holding a sword on the horse, but now the sword is like a flag.
Okay.
Yeah, and then like the uniform is like stiffed up. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Looking forward to seeing that. Okay. All right. Look. school safety on the picture of the horse.
So are we gonna have
I got
to,
it. Okay.
so are we gonna have to change that name from Raiders? Just the image, the logo.
Logos.
Raiders are now coming in with flags.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll show you. I have them. I can share them.
No,
I don't
that's
know which one they ended up picking, but I have I can show the two choices. Hold on a second. Here. See. I gotta get back to the Zoom now, wherever that is, right? So the students got to pick between the Raider man in the blue suit or the Raider man in the gray suit. And the Raider used to be carrying a big saber, and now he's carrying a Stevens Raider flag. I don't know if they went with gray or blue. Do you know, Megan? They went with the blue one.
All right, thank you. Okay, on to conflict of interest. There have been none turned in, so we are on to the first reading of policies and procedures. Number 10, I need a motion. So Troy and Deb. Discussion. I do not see, before we have questions from board members, I was going to have.
Miss
Val
Seals is
Seals.
not on. I'm told she is possibly in Chamberlain at a training. Mr. Talley and I will do our very best to address the concerns.
Okay. Could you give a brief explanation? It came to policy committee and why?
So my understanding is our curriculum policy and our library policy really overlapped. And we wanted to make sure we separated those. So there was a very distinct library book policy and a curriculum policy where the curriculum goes through the curriculum committee. So that I think originated this.
Yep, and that was, there was two main points to that. So
Right.
Mrs. Swager just explained the first one. The second one is what we've been finding with these policy, a lot of our policies we've been reviewing is they've been revised so many times over the years that there's contradictory language. I think we haven't in the past done a good enough job of really reading through the entire policy and looking at procedures. So we're finding procedures not matching policies and old portions of policy not matching revised portions of policy. So we wanted to separate those out. So there's a distinction between, for example, if someone, deems a library book unacceptable and they want to pursue the opportunity to remove that book, there's a clear cut and dry process for that versus the curriculum piece of that, which is kind of handled differently. So through the TLI office. So we wanted to kind of have those distinctions there. So this is, there's a lot on here, as you can see, but as we've shared with the exhibits and the procedures and the policy, there is a ton of stuff in there. And we have spent a lot of time going through it methodically. And so, if we find other things with it, we're going to continue to provide those edits as necessary, but we're trying to clean it up basically for those two reasons.
Right. And I believe that some of the language is updating according to the Library Association of America, a
National Library
something.
Standards,
Yes.
something, yeah.
So I'm sure
yeah,
that some of
yeah.
that language is being
Yeah.
updated to match that as well.
Correct.
And then the other thing I think that I remember talking about in the policy committee is that this isn't something that can't be revisited, even if we pass it. It still goes through a second reading, but even then we could still have input into changing it again as far as the reconsideration for checklists. If we have a committee that we can get together with community members and parents and board members in order, or teachers as well, to be able to read through these things, come up with the rubrics that we're gonna do in the future. Because as we all know, there's been some issues raised with books in the last couple of years. So was there anything else?
No, I think it's a great statement, President Thomas. I would agree with that. I think this is just a starting point. We're just
Okay.
trying to get the policies, back from the 1980s, so to speak, and get them up to speed with where we're at. And if we want to revisit it further down the line, as far as, this is kind of a moving pendulum anyway. So I think it would be wise to revisit some of those processes and procedures and adapt them accordingly moving forward.
I would also like to add that just because a book maybe shows up on our book list for even our library books in the district does not mean they are shelved. Many times AP lists will come out with books on them, encourage the district to buy. We may buy them. We may have a copy of it to be read. The teachers may decide that, no, we don't want to utilize that book. It will be housed in the back of a library. It won't be shelved. So we still have to list that we purchased it and we have it because we didn't surplus it. So those are things, sometimes teachers go back and access books in libraries that, students don't have access to.
Really quick, just because they're not shelved doesn't mean they're not digitally kept, correct?
We don't keep digital copies of all the books that we shelve.
Okay. But it
So it
does
would-
mean that we could have digital copies, just not actual physical copies within the library.
We do carry some,
Right.
we do carry some digital only copies, but
Right.
I'm specifically regarding some books that were referenced here tonight. For instance, Push.
Right.
Push is a book that was sent out by the AP Literature at the national level. We physically have 6 copies at Stevens High School. As far as I can determine through conversation with principal and staff, it has not been utilized by any students or any classroom. It is shelved away. No teacher has decided to use it.
So it's not available for the kids?
It's not in the library. It's not available for kids to just walk up and check out. No.
So we probably need to check to see if it's on digital then as well. All right, Mrs. Clapham?
I just wanted to, I guess, clarify, or like end this discussion, is this more as a whole? Are we gonna go item by item? Like I'm just trying to figure out how to approach and make the discussion efficient. So that I'm not like.
I
all
think
over
we
the
better
map.
go as a whole. Is there any particular one that you have language that you're,
Yeah, I have a few. So one, I would say on, and I kind of ran into this, and this is not my hill to die on, so we're very specific, donations of materials will not be accepted. I understand, like, if someone donates a lot of books and going through them, however, I feel like if this says this as a carte blanche, so we have a book that's in the library, that's appropriate, that someone has 20 copies of, we're telling them that we won't take the book. So that doesn't really, like, if we just hard stop, no donations of books, I feel like that could be cutting our nose off to spite our face, like, and I understand, I said we have to like filter them somehow, and maybe the reason is that our library staff doesn't have time to filter them, and maybe that's the reason. But it just seems like the hard stop could be, maybe.
so
limiting.
we'll go one by one on what you have to say.
So we discussed this in detail over especially the last 4 years, post-COVID, when we became a one-to-one. Librarians are library media specialists, so they have taken on the role of all of the computer check-in, check-out, dealing with IT issues, being that go-to person. So the amount of time librarians previously had to read, to make judgments about books has been, I would say, significantly diminished by the added media piece. So when we took that into consideration and we talked about donations, we felt it was very important that we decide all or nothing, like that if we weren't going to accept books at the elementary level, if we weren't going to accept them at the middle and high school. We also determined that knowing that our librarians do not have the time to sift through and read every single donated material, it was just better to draw the line in the cement and say, we will not accept donations. Also, much of the donations that we get are incredibly old books that somebody found in somebody's grandmother's attic that they don't want to get rid of after grandma has moved out and gone somewhere else to live. And so the number of Reader's Digest book anthologies that we had donated, complete sets of National Geographic magazines, which ultimately then became our task to dispose of. It's just a call to eliminate that issue for our staff.
All right, next issue.
I mean, we can bounce to somebody else too.
No, let's stick with one person at a time.
So on where we say,
Which one is it?
IDE2, so it'd be letter D on the agenda, the reconsideration checklist.
Okay.
So when B says authenticity, is the author competent and qualified in the field? This seems like a very subjective statement, I guess, is my question, because how does someone define, like, you say competent in the field, and this is a, I don't know, a fiction, a medieval fantasy, like, I don't know how you determine that. Like, we have a lot of things on this list, and yes, we should be thorough, but I just don't really know how someone decides, particularly if you're talking about a fictional book. It's a little easier if you're talking about the chemistry of, trees in South Dakota. Okay. But if you're talking about something that is even historic fiction, how someone decides that, I just don't know. Like, I don't know if that's really reasonable.
You'll notice that is in black. So that is a previous statement. It's not in red. I would say that as a former English teacher, that would come from the process of we become far more self-published in recent times than previously. Also, I think it oftentimes referred to nonfiction pieces of work. So because it goes on to say in that B section, what is the reputation and significance of the author publisher in the field? So in the field, I would make the inference that that is a field of study, which is nonfiction. And are the sources well documented, which I also believe the terminology sources refers to nonfiction. So I think it's the dealing with those two things at that level, Ms. Clapham, the self-published piece that we have to be wary of, and the nonfiction piece about authenticity of what is being published.
Yes, and then when we look at IA 80-P, so it kind of speaks to the question. So, I mean, this is pretty lengthy, and I, again, understand if we're going to be very specific and very clear, like, I get needing the levels of appeal or reconsideration. But so in the very beginning, it says, once a resource is challenge is initiated, all individuals involved in the review process must follow the timelines and procedures. And then it says, read, view, listen to the work in its entirety. Well, these things are saying within 7 days. So you're asking, like you're saying, a person in this group could have a 500-page book, and they're expected to read it in its entirety based on this timeline, because the first strict says within 7 days, and everyone in the group. And then they said, unless we specify how many books can be called into question at a time, are we setting up a policy to say someone would have to read 12 books in 7 days in their entirety, and everybody in this group would have to read all those books in their entirety?
Well, I do not doubt that there is some serious problems. One of the things that the reason this came up as well is because parents are saying this is too much for parents to even have to go through, or teachers that find books, all of these different levels. It is very lengthy. And you do make a good point about the days listed. Again, I think the only thing that was majorly changed on that one was that it would not remain in circulation, that it would be pulled until it could be done. Now, I realize that 7 days is very short, but also if we did make a distinction between how many books at a time, that would be okay, I think. But the 7 days, it's the same as complaints. We only give about 7 days after an incident happened. And if we don't shorten that, then we can't be held accountable to getting back to people. If we make it 30 days, that
And I don't
just
think it has
ends
to be
up
30, but I
like,
just think, I mean, we talk about all the time, our teachers have teachers up, because in these groups is librarian, primary, our teachers' plates are full. And now if this comes up, we are asking a teacher who are already burning out with the 1,000 things they have to do. Oh, we just threw this book, like, so I'm not saying that we don't need to have accountability. I'm not saying there doesn't need to be a deadline. I just like asking 7 days, even it said particularly without the clarifying how many you can, just it seems like it's setting us up to do something we cannot do. Like we can't actually do. It seems like we would be creating a policy that we cannot uphold. And so I don't think it's wise to create a policy that we are going to, like, we're going to trip over and fail. Because even, I mean, if it gets to like the district level and we, you know, so you have a board member, a principal, like we're asking a principal to read this book too. I mean, again, I'm not against them being asked to read the whole thing. So we're talking about something in its entirety, and I absolutely believe that's a good idea. But we also have to be reasonable with, I mean, the same reason we're saying we're not going to take donated books because they don't have time. Like we just addressed, they don't have time. And then we're creating something else that really someone doesn't really have time.
I can see your point. This is one of the things though, that has obviously worked up until now. So we haven't had that problem. So it's not a creation of a new policy. This has been obviously something we're trying to update as well, but this is also something for the meantime in getting a committee together from the community that has asked us to please take a look at this procedure because it is too long, regardless for both sides, for the school district and those making the complaint. It will be revisited by a committee and it will be gone through in length. The reason why it's on just for right now to change that language is because all of these are together and we're trying to update them all at the same time to match each other as much as possible. And I'm not saying that that can't still happen. So that would happen within the next 2 months, if not sooner. So do you have anything? Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add probably if you look at the multiple levels, so there's 5 levels here. And if you read the language in there, that's a lot of days when you add them up cumulatively. I mean, this is talking probably 2 months time here.
Yeah.
So to your point, I see what you're saying as well, Mrs. Clapham, but I think for us as a review committee, I think that was the main thing that stuck out to me was just because there's so many levels, how do we get a handle on that without adjusting that time? So at each level, there's a large chunk of time in between that might prohibit us from, I think, being efficient or getting the process completed. And I think that's why people bring the issue forward is they want some resolution to it as quickly as possible. But again, if you go through there's multiple stages here we're talking anywhere between 7 and 20 days of response time. So that's when you add it all up and it goes to level 5, which is the board, that could be 2 months, month and a half, 2 months down the road. So just wanted to note that.
Next point.
I think that's my other thing is just so we talk about this time and however, even if it's the 7 days, whatever time, and it could take 2 months. So this change to be removed from circulation. So we go to level 1 and we talk about the Board of Education recognize the right of parents to request that their children do not use the challenged resources. To me, so we remove it from circulation, but we also say the parents have the right for them not, so it almost seems contradictory. Like, yes, we understand that a parent has absolutely the right to say, I question this book. I don't want my child to read it. We honor that. We respect that. That child doesn't read it. No other parent has said that at that point. So now we're removing it completely from circulation for one's parents' wishes for their one child, perhaps other children, but for their, when we have honored their right to say, like, you know, we flag it or whatever, like this. And I feel like you could even say, if a child checks it out, this book has been flagged for review. A parent has the choice to say, oh, it's been flagged for review. I don't want them to read it, or I'm okay with it. But to remove it from circulation, I think is preemptively taking a book out of circulation for other children before a decision has even been made. And so it seems to me that recognizing both sides, the parent's choice to say, no, I don't want to read this, they said, perhaps flagging it and saying, this is a flagged book, your child may or may not read it, yes. But to remove it from circulation, again, particularly because we haven't specified how many could be pulled at once, we could be talking about, we've pulled 25 books that nobody's student can read because theoretically one person has chosen to challenge them. I mean, it's a slippery slope, I feel like.
I would respectfully disagree, but I think it's better to be safe than sorry and pull it out. If the parent still wants to have their child read it, if it's flagged, they could certainly say, I want them to read it. So, and you can get it at the normal library too. It just depends on how this is truly worded as to how many books at one time. I think you would have to fill out, does it have
They would have to fill out a complaint for each book.
each book, right?
And I
You
do,
couldn't just list 25 in the one
No.
page that it says. So it is one book at a time.
however, I mean, I could see the validity of limiting the number per
Oh, yeah.
individual at a time. We also have a meeting scheduled. The director of TLI has a meeting scheduled with some librarians to discuss the potential of creating an area of middle and high school libraries, particularly that are a opt-in section of the library for parents to opt into allowing their child to check out books from a particular area of the library. That is a very new idea that is going to be floated to by the TLI to some library and media specialists. I don't know what will become of that, but I do think it's important to recognize that it has become very apparent in our society, our community, and others that there's a different way of looking at texts that are in libraries, books that are in libraries, and that may be a way to address the concerns of both groups. But we need to figure out how realistic that is for libraries to deal with that. How we'd get that information out to parents, and those very new discussion, but I do think it's important to recognize that. I think that the move from remain in the circulation to be removed from the circulation could come into that idea that it could be moved to that other part of the library, the restricted, lack of a better word, the restricted section in the meantime, or something like that. I also feel that the number of emails that I receive weekly about concerns about books that are in our libraries does warrant us taking a proactive approach to that.
Yeah, I like the opt-in idea. I think respectfully, President Thomas, I think we have to be careful when we say, oh, they get at the public library, then we get into an access discussion. And that's really, when we talk about providing access, so someone has a, you know, lives in Rapid Valley and doesn't have transportation, like the access to public libraries is not the same for every child. And we have to do our best as a district, like to provide access to books. And so I'm a little cautious when I say, oh, well, you can just get it somewhere else. That access isn't the same for everyone. But I like the idea and the concept of the opt-in. And that's what I kind of feel like I was describing, and not as eloquently as Mrs. Weigert, and saying, you know, if it's flagged, like that there's an option for parents and parents would be aware, but parents who don't want their kids treated would have their rights respected and honored, and parents who do want their kids treated would also have their rights respected and honored. So I think that concept is a good one. I think we could grow with in this policy.
Bishop Carr?
I just have a simple clarification. So it is possible for the district to own a book or have a book or buy a book without it being accessible to a particular student? That yes or yes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There are many books that are available only to teachers.
So if a parent was concerned about a book that they saw on that list, for them to know that there's a hard copy in their child's library, they would have to go to the library and ask, is there a physical copy of this book that my child?
I think they could email the school.
Oh, okay.
Email the administration, email the librarian and find out if there's a copy shelved. I don't know that there's a way for us to differentiate what was bought for professional development or PD or access through book lists that are sent out, like by advanced placement, that our teachers, if we send people to a training and they get a book, the book is district property. So they can be shelved in a book room or in the back of the library.
I think my reasoning is just for parents for it to be fair for the district. If a parent is concerned for their child having access and their child cannot have access, then it's a moot point. However many books we have, your child cannot have access to that particular book that we own. So that's why I want to make sure that parents are able to educate themselves on what's available to their child and what's not.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Berkland.
Thank you. First, I have a question. So let's say a book goes through this process and it's found that it is going to remain in the library. I didn't see any, but is there any wording in there for whether that book can be challenged again?
Good question. I do not recall that either, but that might be certainly something to put into it.
Or certainly a time limit maybe on that.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that it can't, but it doesn't say that it
So
can be
maybe we
again.
wanna add something like not within the year or something like that.
I
Because
feel like the time limit.
otherwise we could effectively ban that book anyway, especially if we do decide to keep that it will be removed from circulation as soon as that process finishes. We could just do it again and then.
Well, I think that we could put in that once a book has been challenged and the process has been seen completely through.
There could be wording that
Yeah.
says a certain amount of time before it can be challenged again, because we may find that down the road, 2 years, maybe 3, somebody else has it and somebody else reviews it again, and it's found the opposite, depending on who is reviewing it and the times, et cetera. So I don't think we could say, we shouldn't have language that says indefinitely. We went through this rubrics, maybe that was faulty, whatever, and revisit it again. So
I don't disagree, but like I said, I just want something in there. Otherwise you could just, if I was a parent who really wanted a book gone, or I could just do it again and do it again, do it again. So the other kind of just thoughts that I had with the donations, perhaps we could add some sort of line that exceptions may be made by instructional counsel or someone, I don't know who, just because I agree most of the time it's going to be not great books, but maybe maybe someone does want to donate a whole bunch of new books and maybe we could do that. I just hate to say no to free stuff when when we're where we are as a district. So I totally get the reasoning behind having to go through all of that, but
I mean, I think we could. I know that we accept other donations with board approval, so maybe there'd be an option to.
I would ask, so some of the things that you've brought up, and you reach out to Val Seals. I know that she has some other ideas of reasons why that one in particular, from what she's seen, not just what Mrs. Swaggart has said tonight. So
okay, I will do that. And then just a couple of comments here. I do not like the policy as is because of that removal of circulation. Because parents' rights, I do believe in parents' rights, and parents' rights means every parent. And I don't like any policy where one parent can make a choice for 30 or 300 or Central High School's case, 1,800. I don't know how many there are now, other students. That just feels like too much power given to 1 or 5 or 10, even if it's 10 people, that's still 10 people that have made a decision for all 1,800, potentially for, as we've talked about, 3 months. That's a whole quarter of school. So I don't have any problem with flagging them and saying, hey, this book has been challenged by another parent or community member, or teacher, admin, whoever. But I do have major concerns about removing it entirely. And just the due process idea. We live in a country where you are innocent until proven guilty. I feel like that same thing kind of applies here. Of if we just give the consequence immediately, then that's not going through that appropriate process. So.
Mrs. Baker.
In answer to your question, if a parent wants to have access to that book, they could do it through the public library. It's on the public library is free and it has online services. So
As Mrs. Clapham mentioned, it's not. We
Hold on one second. Let Mrs. Baker have her say.
it is free and it's online. So there's very few people that don't have access to the library if they really want it. And if they really want to read one of these books that we pull for a short period of time.
I guess I would just make a comment too about the amount of time. I think, again, it's better safe than sorry, and it does have a process where it could be put back into place. If it is found that it is not appropriate for the school, having it access to it for the next, whatever it is, the amount of time that could be up to 2 months that it goes through those different levels. If it is found to be inappropriate and found to be something that can be pulled, the amount of time that it sits there is, again, only maybe 2 months, or that it sits out of circulation for review. I think it's better to be safe than sorry. And it's not necessarily power to one parent. It is safety for those students. If we are talking about, in particular, the book push, that should absolutely be pulled if it doesn't even, go to the meet the standards of the handbook. So, if we're talking about other books, I think that we already know that have been used for quite some time and that have been maybe challenged in the past, that process can be so much faster as they go through it and could be done within a day at each level. So I think it's not putting power into one parent. It is putting power into the district to keep these kids safe if there is something that is truly inappropriate. Go ahead, Mr. Berkland.
I just wanted to say that I feel like that is kind of overstepping our bounds. No, safety from a book is just something that feels more like a parent's issue than our issue. No one's going to get hurt from a book, in my opinion. And that's fine. You shared yours and I can share mine. The other comment that I did just want to make, and you brought up a little bit that I do just want to have out there, is a lot of times when we think about these ideas, you talk about books like Push, or you talk about books like Fun Home. There are a lot of books that are challenged that they have an F-bomb in them, which I would say, I would almost guarantee the majority of our parents want. And so I just have concerns about going you say it's in the name of safety, and I hear that. But I don't want to take a small percentage of our parents and give them the power to go against what a huge percentage of our parents may want.
Okay, Mrs. Swaggart.
So I do feel like I do need to point out that our district covers a vast amount of territory, and Rapid City Public Library is not free to where I live, Blackhawk, or the Valley. It's within the city limits, and there is a cost. I don't remember what it was. There is a cost for me to go to the Rapid City Public Library and get a library book because I live out of the city limits. So I do want to serve those parents and represent that as well. But for instance, where I live, I can go to the Piedmont Public Library and get a free library card there and then have access to the state library. But I don't think Rapid Valley has any library access.
Mrs. Baker.
I find it kind of crazy that we are changing the mascot because it has a sword and we're not willing to protect our kids from a book. To pull it for a short period of time, I think is a safeguard. And if we're worried about a sword and we're not worried about this, there's something terribly wrong with this.
All right, Mrs. Clapham.
I would just to comment, and I want to be very productive and reasonable and just saying, we said we're worried about a sword. That's not a board policy. That was a school decision on a mascot. So that's comparing apples to oranges. It's not comparing the same thing. So I just think we need to be careful when we're making comparisons, and we have to try to be like reasonable and logical, and we don't want to make any decision based on emotion. So we just want to make sure we're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges when we're talking about a mascot and safety versus something else.
All right, last comment on this, Mr. Brooklyn.
Okay, I guess. Sorry, that threw me off. So I just wanted to say one thing. The difference between a t-shirt or a flag or a sword on a mascot is the learning part. Part of our policy is that we do look at it as a whole. So if you can learn something from these books that might have a swear word in it, if you are reading a whole entire history book that talks about rape of slaves, if we pull that part out, yes, it's going to look bad. And that's why we do delineate those things. And the other thing that I wanted to just mention was I am asking for a compromise and saying they can stay in, but we flag them. And what I'm feeling is that there's no movement there, that we are not banning. I'm sorry, I used that word. We are removing these books, and that is that. And I think we can come up with a reasonable compromise of moving them to a separate section, like Mrs. Swaggart mentioned. I just hate to say no parent, no student can access these if anyone says otherwise.
And those discussions are going to be discussed with Val Seals and some librarians on how to do that moving forward. So that is actually movement. All right, we have A through G. We have a first and a second. We do need to do roll call because Jim is online right now.
Kate Thomas,
Yes.
Troy Carr,
Yes.
Deb Baker,
Yes.
Jim Hansen,
Yes.
Clay Colomb is absent, Jamie Clapham,
No.
Michael Berkland.
No.
All right, I need a motion and second for the approval of the proposed consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right, again, roll call. Does anybody want anything pulled first? Okay, roll call.
Kate Thomas,
Yes.
Troy Carr,
Yes.
Deb Baker,
Yes.
Jim Hansen,
Yes.
Clay Colomb is absent, Jamie Clapham,
Yes.
Michael Berkland.
Yes.
All right, moving on to items for board information, the Finance Committee report. Is that you, Mr. Sassy? Or? the best part of the
I
meeting.
suppose it could be, sure.
Um,
Well, certainly, President Thomas, I can give an update on the discussion throughout the last several meetings of the Finance Committee, and then we have two members present, and I would certainly invite them to make any comments as well. So, obviously, early on in the budget process, what we try to focus on during the discussions with the Finance Committee are, one, really specifying what the fiscal goals are based upon the priorities of the board as we enter the year and as we look forward to the next year. Of course, one of the priorities that rose to the very top throughout all of our conversations, all the way back to the retreat with the board early in the fall, was compensation. Obviously, we know compensation is a major issue for the district, badly needs to be addressed. There are many other priorities, many of them that rank very, very high. However, we've talked about the concept often, both in Finance Committee and with the board in general, that the two very, very high priorities in this district are really at opposite ends of the spectrum, and how we attack them requires very different strategies. So on one end of the spectrum is the compensation issue, and it all the way to the other end of the spectrum is our facilities issue. And that takes two very different strategies and approaches. And so we try to be mindful of those things as we're having these discussions. A lot of what we talk about throughout this process are things that are happening at the legislative level in terms of state aid and what those conversations look like and sound like, in our projections on where we think we're going to land as a result of that process. Obviously, also talking through the other moving pieces of the budget, local effort or property tax to the different funds being a huge part of that. And ultimately trying to come to a point, again, especially right now, which is a very important point throughout this, both the budgeting process and the district processes in terms of negotiation, where we can feel confident and unified with going into negotiations with a specific amount of resources to discuss with those groups and to be able to put on the table in terms of negotiations. So I would say at this point, that is priority one. Priority two, then very, very shortly after that, is moving into finalizing the budget, moving the amounts determined from negotiations into that budget, and then trying to get a holistic view of that and where we're going to be. I would tell you at this point in time, I think that I would really commend the Finance Committee. I think they've done a really nice job of considering all these very difficult decisions that need to be made. I think they've made some really great recommendations. We kick off negotiations tomorrow, and some of you will get to hear my negotiations presentation multiple times, and I apologize about that up front, but I think we're moving into that process in a very different place than we have been in the past. I think a much more positive place. And so I'm really hopeful for great conversations. I think that those are going to go very well. And I'm very, I feel very good about the financial position that the district is in as opposed to where it was when I came into the district. I think we made a ton of progress. The board has been great. All the working with all the administration have been great in terms of understanding some of the things we have to do to get to that point. But I do feel like we're in a good position and have very clear priorities laid out. So Mrs. Clapham or Ms. Baker, anything you all would add to that?
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd say we're excited about what the legislature
Yeah.
chose to
Yeah.
fund the target teacher salary.
Yeah. Yeah. Also a good thing. Any other questions or thoughts from the board?
Go ahead.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if this fits in the puzzle, but I'm gonna try to squeeze it in.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
We're talking about finances. We talked about it And I think in leadership, and the reason why I'm bringing it up tonight, because a legislator, a city council person asked me about it. Where are we on talking about a grant writer to kind of help with the funding, needs, revenue
Sure.
needs or streams or finding that?
Sure, sure. Yeah, we've had some initial conversation in regards to a grant writer. I have some experience with having a grant writer in the system. The district I worked for previously had a grant writer. I think that those positions are incredibly helpful in terms of looking for pots of resources that we wouldn't normally look at or have time to look at, or even if we found have the ability to, the skill or the time or the ability to write for those grants, because that can be a really lengthy, difficult process in and of itself. Oftentimes what organizations will do is in one way or another attach the compensation of that position to the success of the grant writing. And so I think that's a good way to be able to justify the position and offset some of the cost. But I'm very supportive of that. I would also invite Superintendent Swigert to make any comments she has, but I think that there are a lot of resources available out there that we just don't have the time or the knowledge to track down and apply for, and things that we could really use. So any thoughts, Superintendent Swigert?
I am supportive of that as well. I am very fortunate that the community contacts I have are constantly sending me grant ideas. I think there's some confusion in the community about Director Talley's Director of Federal Programs and Grants, and that is after they're received, what she does with them. And I think that oftentimes district and community thinks, well, her title has grant in it, so that must mean she writes them, and that is not at all the case. And I think we need to be very aware that anytime we create a new position, there's a lot of targeting of, why do we need that position? Why are we spending money on that? So I think we've been really cautious of moving that idea forward, but I think that is something that we can certainly talk about, and with the board's approval, move forward with that, because I do think it would be very beneficial to us.
I mean, I agree with Sister Peggy, but I'd be hard pressed for anybody to argue to me that grant writer is not a position. Thank you. That can be beneficial, especially if they pay for themselves, right? You paid somebody $60,000 to get you a $2 million grant. That's worth it, right? So.
I just really want to point out the fact
no.
that I want to clarify that is not Director Talley's role, which I think people make that connection.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. In regard to a grant writer, you would really be looking at competitive grants, not formulaic grants, which are really Director Talley's position is managing those formulaic grants. So it's a good point.
Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
And
Go ahead.
I'm going to ask a question I know the answer to,
Yeah.
but
Feel
just to
free.
put it out there. So you mentioned property taxes. We just all got our property valuations. Does that mean that our schools are going to see an influx of money here?
It's a really excellent question. So,
Thank you.
so there is a highly misunderstood mechanism at play here. And that is the idea that the amount of local effort that any school district, not just Rapid City, but any school district in the state receives, is removed during the calculation of state aid. And so ultimately, if a district's need isn't growing, and I quote need because that is a specific piece of the state aid formula, and that is based upon multiple factors, primarily enrollment and the target teacher's salary, also on an overhead factor. If it is determined through that formula that need is not increasing, then essentially what you have is a trade-off between the proportion that your local effort takes versus your state aid. So if you think about our district situation, we've had stagnant enrollment over a period of several years. Big drop after 2019, and then stagnating enrollment. And so the need or the bucket of resources that we have available, according to the state aid formula, has not increased. And we've had really rapid property tax growth, increased at a very rapid rate, meaning that the local effort side of that has increased. So if you think about it, visually, it's this trade-off where local effort has the proportion of the local effort, for example, in the general fund has increased and the proportion of state aid has decreased. Overall, the total amount of resources don't increase at as rapid a rate as you would think, looking at your specific property tax valuation. And so it's a really complex situation. And I think is, again, probably the most misunderstood factor in terms of overall school finance in our state. It's really difficult. Yes, sir.
Mrs. Clappin?
Just a really quick follow-up to what Bishop Carr asked, which I'm glad you asked about the grant. So in that same conversation, and this is probably really a finance committee question, but I'm asking it because I'll forget.
Sure.
So let's say that we have an amazing grant writer and they get $3 million. Is that in turn, because it's local effort, going to actually decrease state aid? Like, is that going to have the same effect as?
That's an awesome question. No, it does not. Only the specific revenue generated from local effort is calculated into that formula. So I got this question. I've been doing this job 15 years. I got this question for the first time earlier this week. A person asked me if the district were to pass an opt-out. So an opt-out and a bond are very different mechanisms, right? Bond is a separate tax levy specifically for the purpose of building buildings. Opt-out is an additional tax levy attached to the general fund levy that increases your operating revenue. Only for the general fund, only used for general fund purposes, not to be used for building purposes. So really would be an injection of general fund revenue in addition to your regular levy. But I had this question for the first time. Someone asked me, would an opt-out essentially boost your local effort again, drive down the state aid amount and leave you in really the same spot? I didn't know how to answer that question. I've never had that question, but I reached out to the state, and it is considered differentiated revenue outside of the regular local effort formula, and also would not count against you in the state aid formula. So, yeah. So again, back to the value of the idea. I think anytime we can drive resources outside of that formula and resources that are available and not necessarily coming from our local taxpayers, it's a win for us. So I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
Yes.
I had one quick follow-up, if that's okay.
Okay,
with
go
that.
ahead.
So going to the cup metaphor, the cup works really well in my brain.
Yeah. Yep.
A grant would be like a new cup.
Yes.
And a opt-out would be a new cup. It doesn't change this cup.
Yep.
We get a little bonus cup.
That's a great way to think about it. A
Awesome.
supplemental cup,
Yeah,
so to speak, right?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good thought.
All right, we are on, thank you. We're
Yes,
on to the
absolutely.
superintendent report. Go ahead, Mrs. Swider.
Thank you, President Thomas. I think I'm going to ask you to move the superintendent's report to the beginning of the, no, just kidding. Of the agenda. I want to start tonight by asking the sports medicine group that to step up maybe to the podium, Kyle and group. So President Thomas and board, tonight in the consent agenda, we approved an extenuation of our contract to work with the sports medicine group. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but before they do that, I would like to say that I want to take time to thank this organization. They have stuck with Rapid City area schools through thick and thin for a very long time. They and their employees are highly dedicated to Rapid City area schools, Rapid City area sports programs. In my 34 years of the district, I have worked closely with a variety of people in their organization. They took incredibly good care of my daughter both times she tore her ACL. I credit Mr. Richter with being able to tape ankles 100% based on his teaching that skill to me, which has come in remarkably handy over the years. So when they approached us about adding to our commitment to work with them because our contract was up, I just looked at the care and commitment that they show this community and show the schools. And I'm sincerely thankful for them and their willingness to step forward. This agreement is very beneficial, not only to Central and Stevens, but all of our student bodies. They have grown their services. Physio, Mr. Jensen's program is really an opportunity for all of our students to increase their athleticism. So they give us funds, they give us supplies, and they give us a ton of support. So I want to recognize them for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you all for that. Appreciate it. Immensely. Thank you all for you, school board, community, the daunting task.
There we go. It's a daunting task, and I really commend you all for putting in the time for our community and our schools. And thank you for the kind words. My name is Kyle Weiss. I'm the CEO of Black Hills Surgical Hospital and Black Hills Orthopedics. With me today, I have Dan Jensen, an owner and physical therapist of Physio, Greg Lose, the president and chief operating officer of Black Hills Surgical Hospital, and good old Paul Richter, who has indeed been with the school district through us for approximately 25 years. And then there's two other athletic trainers that you probably see at a lot of the events along with our trailer. As you know, orthopedics, sports medicine is a significant part of our business, something that is dear in our hearts. So we appreciate the longstanding relationship. We appreciate the reciprocal partnership that we've had over the years. 4 years ago, approximately, we did add Dan Jensen and Physio to our program as part of our strength and conditioning component. As you all know, throughout the state, there's been a wave, right, of strength and conditioning. And we of course jumped on that, but we wanted to find the right expert to do it. And Dan's program has been great. It's been building for about 4 years, but it's still at the inception. And I appreciate you all committing to another agreement with us to let us continue building that program for the benefit of the students in the schools. So thank you again. Happy to answer any questions, comments, but I did want to give Dan a chance to talk just very briefly, because I know that it's getting long for you all, about his services and his appreciation. So thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having us tonight. I wanted to speak a little bit about the things that don't show up on a paper and a contract that we're up to with the students. So just to give an overview of what we provide to the school district, we have 2 master's trained strength and conditioning coaches, one dedicated to Stevens, one dedicated to Central High School, that are embedded into the fabric of the high school in more ways than one. So we very recently have actually helped integrate them into some of the weight training classrooms. So our staff is actually embedded there during the day. I like to think of it as some soft additional FTE for the district. The great thing about that is the relationships that our staff forms with students. So our hope is really twofold, but the overall mission is just to help the trajectory of a student athlete's life in a couple ways. So, you know, there's many student athletes who do want to play competitively at the collegiate level. And we firmly believe that Rapid City student athletes should have the same opportunity to play at a collegiate level as their counterparts. 300 miles down I-90. So our goal is to help foster that environment for them to develop as an athlete and have that opportunity if that's what they choose. We also know that there's an overwhelming, the vast majority of student athletes do not play college sports. And so what our program does is help teach them how to be healthier humans and how to move better, how to not be afraid to exercise, and promoting a lot of physical and mental health from that aspect. One of the hallmarks of our program is a summer program. We have steadily seen increasing participation in that program, which we're very happy about. On average, last summer we approached 400 students. Yeah, and that includes middle school and high school students. So our staff love it. It's a very fun, high energy environment throughout the whole summer. And we're happy to provide that at a very low cost / no cost to student athletes. In the 4 years since we've started this program, we have not turned away a student at all. During the school year, I would like to note that students pay nothing for this program. And the only time that we do raise funds to help support the program is in the summer. It is less than $4 a day for students. And if you kind of do the math on still having access to our staff throughout the school year, we're happy to not have cost be a barrier. So there are scholarship mechanisms in place for students. If cost is a barrier, we make it not one. So, and both activities directors have been excellent about, communicating with students. If there is a financial need, the Booster Club is there to help. Although I'm very happy to say we haven't taken any of that money and we've given it back to the schools to use how they choose, or the Booster Club to use how they choose. The last thing I'll say about our program that we're very proud of is come this spring, and this is a tradition that we've started since inception, we'll have given $10,000 in scholarship money to senior boy and girl student athletes, one boy, one girl from Stevens, one boy, one girl from Central, $500 scholarship every year to student athletes who demonstrate not just athletic excellence, but good character, hard work, persistence, all of the things that we admire here in the district. So we're looking forward to continuing growing this program in a very big way. We want to win, right? We're here to win. We're here to help the schools win and affect the trajectory of these kids' lives along the way. So we've been very fortunate to partner with Black Hills Surgical Hospital and Black Hills Orthopedics and their staff. We are a team, and so we're happy to be one spoke in the wheel of the sports medicine team. So yeah, we look forward to continuing this work, and we thank you for that. So thanks.
I really appreciate you guys coming and spending this evening and the whole meeting too. This is unexpected. We hardly ever get to see the faces of those who we make contracts with. We do obviously trust our administration when they bring things like this forward, but we have seen you out and about, on the fields. So we do appreciate your time taken tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Talley.
I just want to take the opportunity to thank these guys. I worked with them for quite a while over at Central, and it was great to just see the program grow the last few years, especially embedding those strength and conditioning coaches into the daily lives of these kids. It wasn't just about lifting weights, as these gentlemen know, it was about relationships. And I remember our guys over there helping student athletes with connections to colleges and getting that exposure to potential scholarship opportunities. And they just become part of the staff. And so they high five kids call them coach, that type of thing. So it's really a partnership that's extremely important. And our trainers are second to none. So Paul and Caitlin and company. I just can't say enough good things about the partnership, and I hope we continue it forever. So thank you, guys.
Thank you for allowing me time to do that. March was Music in Our Schools is Music in Our Schools month. And so I'm very blessed to have been able to attend United in Song, Festival of Bands. And last weekend we wound up the month with the Strings concert, all held at the Monument in the theater. Gives all of the students a chance to have a real live performance on a professional stage with professional stage hands. Theater was very full for all those shows, so fantastic. I think it is worthwhile to point out that we have a premier music program in our district with incredible music staff, and in all of those areas, chorus, band, orchestra, and we compete at a national level. And I've said it at all of their openings that we are arguably have the best music program in the nation. I think we could.
International as well.
International, yes. So other things that I've done, inter-school parent meeting. They are a wonderful way to connect with parents in our community and our schools. I always appreciate that. I visited Stevenson High School in Chicago last week. It was an incredible opportunity to learn, but more than anything, I appreciated the time with staff. I traveled with 12 Rapid City area school teachers, and that one-on-one time with them was even more valuable than everything I learned at Stevenson. So appreciate that. Principals have spent quite a few days recently working on professional development themselves. Last week they worked on PLC scheduling, and today they did leadership training. That is all accredited to Mr. Talley and Director Seals. They have worked really hard to get that up and running for our administrators and our staff, and I appreciate the work that they're doing. I do want to point out that principals are putting in some hard work. This was started late last year. We added this to their plates, and it's incredibly hard work to grow also as leaders and professional, doing that professional development work and learning how to be learning leaders in their buildings. And I want to thank the principals for the time they're putting into that. Region 4 superintendent's meeting. I'm gonna tag on to some things that Coy was talking about earlier. At the regional superintendent's meeting last week, there was a lot of conversation, worry about Governor Noem not signing the budget. I came back, we had conversations. Superintendents were pushing off negotiations, didn't know how much they were going to offer their staff. I came back, talked to Coy about it. I want to celebrate the fact that Governor Noem did sign the budget for that. In her letter, she did acknowledge the fact, I think this is important for us to recognize as well. She did acknowledge the fact that we separated from tradition this year. Our legislators separated us from tradition, and they gave schools a higher amount than they gave state workers and state health providers. Usually it's all lumped the same. And Coy and I would tell you that we believe that it's unfair to lump us all in the same, because if you give it to the state workers and the health workers, state healthcare workers, 100% of the money they get goes to salary. But when we get the money, it also has to go to our keeping the lights on and putting gas in the bus and all of that. And so this was the first time they gave us a larger piece of the funding for that very reason. And I think that we need to make sure that we thank our legislators and thank Governor Noem for signing that. Even though it was a break from tradition, I would hope that we can continue to educate the need for that. I credit our very own Coy Sassy for presenting to our Senate Ed Committee about financing, to presenting at our legislators when we invited them to breakfast with us. Really getting to the heart of how that funding formula works. And I had multiple representatives from our area reach out to me and say that made a huge difference. So I think we need to recognize that. We also need to make sure that we're thanking them. This was paramount to how our district is going to continue next year. Angel Lee and the federal program staff are working hard on our end of the year honoring celebrations. So the feathering ceremony and then the powwow for an honoring for students moving from 5th grade to 6th grade and from 8th grade to high school. All of that work is happening. We're going to be having a district-wide Jeans Week to help fund the end of the year celebration for the 5th and 8th grade. So that will be forthcoming. Focus groups invites for our strategic planning have gone out. Those focus group meetings will be March 28th and 29th. Our coach is coming in and we'll have 2 very long days talking to hundreds and hundreds of people in our community about Rapid City area schools. And then she will come back and give us kind of our focus areas. So I'm thrilled about that. As has been mentioned, negotiations are starting. The board is going to be very busy with that and also with equalization meetings. And I don't know that that is well known that a board member has to be present at all of those equalization meetings as well, because we do receive a pot of that money. And it is a big ask right now of board members. So I know we recognized you recently, at Board of Education Week, but this probably is the week that it should be doing, right? Because this is the week you're really putting in all the work. And then I just want to remind you that this is our last board meeting before spring break. So August, wow. April 1st through 10th, the school district will be out of session for spring break and Easter, and students will return April 11th. So just heads up on all that. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Any questions for Mrs. Swigert from board members? All right, thank you. We are on to other. Any board members have an other? Mrs. Clapham.
I have 3 quick others or shout outs. One, I wanted to give just a shout out and recognition to Mary Smith, who teaches 4th grade at General Beadle. I went to her class to see the math curriculum and her classroom management was impressive. Those kids, she could say a word at this level and they just did exactly that. It was amazing. So I was really impressed with her and just how smoothly. It's hard to, they've had to do 2 curriculums in 2 months, and that's really hard to plan for. And she did so smoothly. And I was just really impressed with her. A shout out to my colleague, Mr. Berkland, for going to read at Blackhawk Elementary as a celebrity reader. Apparently they ask a lot more questions about being a board member, including my own child. So apparently he's cooler to talk to than I am. But I really appreciate that and being out there and helping out our PTA and doing that. And also shout out to Mrs. Anderson or Miss Anderson at Blackhawk. It was just a moment this morning. There was a child absolutely distraught. And I watched her get on her knees and tell her how beautiful and special she was. And just, it was before 8 o'clock in the morning. And she just took that child like, it was her one goal to get her into school and help her have a good day. And those are the things that our teachers are doing every single day, and just to recognize the great things that happen every moment of every day in the district.
Mr. Berkland.
Yeah, mine's pretty similar. So I have been visiting schools and I just wanted to share some kind of shout outs there. First off, district-wide, I'm so impressed with the problem solving that is happening, the creative solutions that we're coming up with when we don't have 3 elementary teachers there a day because they're all out sick and we don't have the subs, or a bus driver can't make it, or whatever. There's so much great problem solving going on out there. At the same time, it's unfortunate that we have those issues and hopefully we can get some budget things figured out. Because I know they say money can't solve everything, but I think it would solve a lot of our issues. But related to that, one of the things that I saw was just like how different every one of our schools is. And that was really eye-opening to me. So one of the things that I heard from a lot of the principals and teachers is just to ask us to be present. And I know that we all, like I had to do over spring break. I know that we all have our jobs, we have our lives, there's stuff going on where admin can't make it down, but that was one thing that I heard a lot, is to just come check it out, and see what's going on. And I would recommend starting with Horace Mann Elementary, because when Jamie went there, she said she didn't get it. But I got a wonderful tour by two of their students. All of their students, not all of their students, many of their students have jobs there that they either chosen for or apply for. And when I showed up, the principal said, "Let me take you to our tour guides." And they had a little guide. So they are ready and waiting for you at Horace Mann for our board, our admin, our community, anyone else. They were great little tour guides.
Mr. Sassy.
I realize I'm not a board member. I apologize. Superintendent Swigert made a really great point. I wanted to just kind of reinforce and add to that. I do think it is miraculous that the legislature separated those increases out. I think it's a recognition of the idea and the drum that we've been pounding on for several years now, that the mechanism that funds schools is totally different, separate and apart from the mechanism that funds other state employees. And even the idea that you know, we are considered state employees. It's a totally different funding mechanism. And I think that, as Superintendent Swigert said, what would be really beneficial is following up with those legislative folks, really encouraging them. Obviously, a lot of thank yous, but also continuing that conversation, because it was a great increase. It puts us in a much better position, but, and I won't jump into the rabbit hole, our state aid will still decline on a year over year viewpoint because of some of these other factors. And so I think there's still work to do. There's still issues that need to be addressed inside that formula, but it is a massive step forward in recognition of the idea that is a totally different mechanism. So great point. I wanted to follow up.
Thank you.
Yep.
I appreciate that. Any others? Bishop Carr.
Is there any way for President Thomas, for the board and or the district to send out a formal thank you to, I don't know if
The representatives?
yeah, do we send a letter or resolution?
could.
I don't know, just something
Yeah.
that we recognize that might be a little more powerful than each
Could
of
all
us
sign
doing
it.
it
Sure.
individually, so.
All right, no others. I need a motion and second to go into executive session for SDCL 1-25-2.1 and SDCL 1-25-2.4. Deb?
Second.
And Ms. Clapham. All right. We still have Jim on, so roll call.
Kate Thomas,
Yes.
Troy Carr,
Yes.
Deb Baker.
Yes.
Jim Hansen,
Yes.
Clay Colom is absent with notice. Jamie Clapham,
Yes.
Michael Berkland.
Yes.
All right, we will have no further action afterwards, and I appreciate every one of you staying for as long as you did. Thank you very much.